At the start of episode 306, you would have heard me read out a whole bunch of names of students and past graduates of the College of Practical Homeopathy. I had this huge podcast hosting and AI integration bill that came up, and one of their students caught wind of it and rallied all of her fellow students and past graduates at the College of Practical Homeopathy, and they donated to help me pay this bill. Well, after I read that out, there was a whole flurry of more donations that came in from the students and graduates of the College of Practical Homeopathy. So it is such a pleasure to get to read out some more names from these amazing group of people. So thank you to Yitka, Katie Mulhern-Smith, Deborah, Sophia Salivos, Kelly and Lisa of Homeopathy Haven and CPH, and Sarah. Thank you so much, College of Practical Homeopathy. You guys, such an amazing team. The way that you've all banded together to help support the podcast and to help me to continue to provide this service free of charge for everybody else to enjoy. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Today's guest is the fabulous Richard Pitt. Richard has been practicing and teaching homeopathy for over 30 years, initially in the UK and then in the United States. He was the director of a homeopathy school in San Francisco for 12 years until 2008, and he taught throughout North America. He was also active in many homeopathic organizations, as well as being the editor of a homeopathic journal and the author of 4 books with several more in the pipeline. What I really enjoyed about our conversation today is the work that he has done in Africa, which is absolutely fascinating. So there are several places you can go and learn more about Richard. One of the websites is richardpitthomeopathy.com. There's also thenaturalmedicineguide.com. talesfromtheroad.info and richardwilliampitt.substack.com. I know you're absolutely going to love today's episode. Thank you so much for listening.
Welcome to the Homeopathy Hangout, where we discuss all things homeopathy from around the world. And now my mum and your host, Eugenie Kruger.
Welcome back to Homeopathy Hangout. And we have a very special guest today, Richard Pitt. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thanks so much, Eugenie. Great to be here.
It's lovely to have you on. Like I said to you before we started recording, is I have been harassed by several listeners from around the world to have you on the show, and you are very much loved in the homeopathic community. And your homeopathic career spans several decades, but in several different countries as well, which just completely blows my mind. So before we started recording, I was thinking, I have so many questions to ask you. I don't know how we're going to fit it all in today, but we're going to make a good crack at it. But I always start off my guests asking them how they were first introduced to homeopathy. So tell us that story.
Okay, so my story was I came back from 4 years of travel, mostly in India, but also Australia, by the way, and different parts of Asia. I was 22, just turning 23. And after 4 years on the road, I just thought it's time to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And my interests really were quite limited to Indian philosophy, motorbikes, and travel. And I thought, what to do? And so I actually nearly applied to go to university to study philosophy, and also theology was my other interest because having spent years in India. And luckily I didn't get into university. And then my friend from New Zealand, in fact, my best friend living with me in England, bought a magazine called Here's Health. In that magazine was a small advert, the College of Homeopathy, London. I thought, and I'd never heard the word, even through my years in India. I didn't know what it was. I went, what's homeopathy? Wrote for the prospectus, read it, read one book called The Patient, Not the Cure by Marjorie Blackie, the Queen's physician. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in a homeopathy class without even really knowing what it is, having not really looked at that, not having been particularly interested in health. My angle was much more philosophy and social politics and environmentalism and that way of thinking. And homeopathy just happened to be the grace that I was given. And that was September 1981. So way back in the day. And so I studied 3 years in England. And this was in North Devon at that point, which was a branch of the London College. And it was the perfect time because my brain was still intact, just about. And then also there was the renaissance of homeopathy going on. And I was part of that second wave of a new generation of homeopaths that sort of refound homeopathy in the 70s and 80s. And so that was it. Studied with Lucas in Greece and in London at that point where George was also incorporating teaching everybody. Went back to India, my love, and studied in Kolkata. And that was the love of my life, was like being back in India and doing homeopathy. And so I spent 3-4 years studying, 3-4 years in practice in the UK. And then I moved to the USA and spent 20 years in the US. And that's where I did most of my formative work, really. I ended up living in California most of the time. And I took over a school called the Pacific Academy of Homeopathy. I was the director of that for 12 years. I was the founding member and president of the Council for Homeopathic Certification, which is now the largest certifying board in North America. And I was part of the cadre of people who we got it all going. There's a whole bunch of us in the Bay Area. I was not alone by any means. There's a lot of us. And then it went from there. Council for Homeopathic Education, I was helping run that. And then the California Homeopathic Medical Society and the California Health Freedom Coalition, where we passed one of the most interesting and important health freedom bills for healthcare in the United States. I worked with a lot of people on that. John Melnichuk was the main head of that, and Diane Miller, who ran the National Health Freedom Coalition. So I did 20 years in the trenches in America. And then I left. I just got out of Dodge, and that was about 15 years ago. And I basically went to a conference in Holland a year before that called Homeopathy in Developing Countries, and reconnected to some old colleagues, a woman called Linda Shannon, who ran the Ghana Homeopathy Project and was the founder of it. My good friend, Dr. Harry van der Zee.
I was waiting for you to say his name. I was going to say you couldn't have been in Africa and not know Harry. Oh.
No, me and Harry spent many months together looking over Lake Malawi in northern Malawi. And so he's one of my great friends and colleagues. And so that conference, I reconnected with a lot of people. And then Linda just dropped a hint. She said, Rich, do you fancy going to Ghana? Our previous coordinators had to leave and we just don't have anyone there. And I was just in that transition period. I'd been back in India and traveling again. And I thought, Africa is on my map. That's where I want to go anyway. I have a love of African music, especially West African music. So I ended up going there and living for a year in Ghana and taking on the project, doing teaching, doing clinics, working in different clinical programs all over the country, living in a little barrio in the center of Accra and watching English football, just enjoying Africa and traveling through West Africa, through Mali, Burkina Faso, Togo. And that opened my desire for Africa in many ways, especially with homeopathy. And a year or two later, Harry van der Zee says, Rich, do you want to go to Malawi? And I went, great, I'm in. So we went there to this project in Malawi and he spent 3 months there. I ended up spending 6 months that year. And then by strange serendipity, there was a conference in Kenya at the Kenya School of Homeopathy in just south of Mombasa on the coast there. And I happened to have a ticket going through Nairobi at that point. So I detoured down to Mombasa, went to that conference and met a Dutch woman called Marie Margray, who was this extraordinary woman who went to Kenya and started a homeopathy school, built it from nothing. She was given a piece of land with nothing on it and has built up a college with 250 students. And so at that conference was great. A lot of people were there. It was co-sponsored through Jeremy Shear's project in Tanzania and Marie's project in Kenya. And homeopaths came from all over Africa. My dear friend Barbara from Swaziland drove up in a minivan with 10 people, took 6 days on the road to come up. And people came from Liberia and Nigeria and Ghana. And then a load of European homeopaths came. We had this amazing conference. Brilliant. And then from there, I went back to Europe, but then I came back the next 3 years and spent 3 months in Malawi and 3 months in Kenya, just working there, volunteering, and that was it. And then toward the end of 2014, I said to Marie, I think I'm done with Africa, Marie. I'm going to go back and live in Europe. And I was living in a yoga center in Spain at that point where I'm still involved in helping manage a yoga center. on top of doing these other things. And then Marie emailed me one day saying, Rich, when are you coming? We've got the money. And what she was referring to was a 4 million euro public health research grant that her friend had got for our college, which was now called the Kenya School for Integrated Medicine. She had to take homeopathy out of the name because of the funding challenges due to quack busters trying to basically intimidate us. So Marie changed the name of the college. Then her friend, who was a medical doctor who'd worked for the UN and WHO and stuff, wrote this extraordinary grant, which the European Union gave to us, a small alternative medicine school in southern Kenya. And this was a public health research. It had nothing to do with homeopathy. So what we did is to integrate homeopathy into the public health research. So we did outcome-based research in homeopathy in mobile and rural clinics. We did other research in different types of traditional medicine, traditional bone setters and midwives. And then we actually did other kinds of public health research and fitted it into what they call the National Community Health Strategy, which is WHO-inspired agenda to try and develop community health in developing countries. That is, taking healthcare to the community. So we sponsored 36 villages with community health workers. We did education in permaculture and healthcare and malaria prevention. And we ran 18 mobile homeopathy clinics and 4 fixed clinics all around this one area of Kenya. And that went on for 5 years. It was a hellish operation because I was educational director of the college and we had so many challenges, and then running the EU project and trying to ensure that we actually achieved our goal, which we finally did. And then I ended up leaving on March the 15th, 2020, having finished 5 years living and working in Kenya. And I went to Swaziland to visit my dear friend Barbara, who runs the Swaziland Homeopathy Project. And she basically was working with me. And we've just finished a book, by the way, which I'll talk about in a minute. And she does amazing work there. And then I got locked down for 7 months because of COVID and couldn't move. I luckily was living in paradise, so I had no complaint. But that also then inspired me to start to investigate the COVID narrative and what that was really about, its health implications, its political implications, and what that means for the whole planet. And I've now been evolving an idea of what the COVID miasm is. COVID as a metaphor, not so much specifically the disease, but a metaphor for a state of mind, a state of consciousness of the planet, and what this is revealing to us and maybe the remedies that we might be seeing. And that's about it. So basically, I've been in Europe more for the last 2-3 years, but I've been back in Swaziland and Mozambique and South Africa for 2 months last year. I've just been in Kenya and Tanzania, and I was in Ghana last October, November, working there. And ironically, I got back involved with the Ghana Homeopathy Project 2 years ago, and I became the coordinator again after a 14-year gap. And so I've been working, and I'm still working in Ghana now on a number of different projects there.
I feel like I want to give you a round of applause because there wasn't one or a breath.
No.
Do you need to have a glass of water after that? I see why everyone has been raving about you, Richard. You are an epic storyteller, and I desperately would love to sit next to you at like a fire, like in Africa somewhere, and hear all of your stories, because I'm sure there are plenty.
Yeah.
Wow, but I don't even know where to start from all of that, because there's so much of that I still want to unpack, including getting Barbara's details, because she sounds like she would be a great one to have on the podcast as well. But just how incredible having that research grant and being able to do all of that and having all those homeopathic clinics. And I actually think Matt Zorn was one of the ones that recommended you as well, because he's also in Kenya, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how amazing that homeopathy is alive and well in Africa by the sounds of it. And it seems like the people embrace it quite well over there. We've had a few people from various parts of Africa on the podcast, and it seems to be received quite well.
Yeah, it's worth talking a bit about that because firstly, Matt, I've never met Matt personally, but I was in Moshi, Tanzania with my good friend Jane Davey. And she said, "Oh, you must meet Matt when you go to Nairobi. He's moved there and he comes from Oregon." And I lived in California, so I knew all the homeopaths in Oregon and in Washington State. So the whole West Coast thing in LA was my home. And so I connected to Matt and we had a really nice connection. And yeah, he told me his story and how he came to Kenya. And then he mentioned you as well. And then, yeah, so all those connections happened, ironically, in the middle of Africa. And yeah, so that was great. My kind of idea is that if you look at homeopathy on the map, it's obviously established in most places in Africa. It's there, but also there's a way to go. And so what I'm interested in doing, and it may or may not happen, is to create a 1-year online postgraduate program for health professionals and use an educational platform like Moodle or something and have it all there. Then train health professionals into how to use homeopathy and try that way to integrate it into the healthcare system. And so when I was in Kenya, I went to Kenyatta University to the Department of Physiocognicy, which is the use of plant medicines and the science of plant medicines. And I know people there, and I'm ideally trying to ally with them to create this 1-year program, mostly online, but it would also be somewhat live teaching, and then offer homeopathy in that context. Because training non-medical people in Africa or younger people into homeopathy is a challenge. Even though Kenya and Ghana, it's legal. There are government departments that regulate traditional and alternative medicine. And in Kenya, they're trying to pass a new health bill. And I'm in discussion with the health ministry there to try and ensure that our standards and our levels of evaluation are basically accepted, and that it doesn't come from someone else who doesn't know about what homeopathy or other alternative medicines are. So that's the idea. So if we can establish it in Kenya and Ghana and maybe in Swaziland or maybe Mozambique, then in theory, it could be a model that actually transplants throughout Africa. Now, South Africa has established homeopathy. There are 2 schools in South Africa. You know that. And it's well established, even though it's quite politically complex there in some ways. But nonetheless, you've got Zambia, you've got Zimbabwe, you've got Mozambique, you've got both English and French and Portuguese colonies, ex-colonies. And there's no reason maybe why we can't integrate it. And actually, African governments, they are more open to it in many ways than Western governments because they have a culture of traditional medicine. Although they embrace modern medicine, which is great, they also have a certain skepticism about the exploits of modern medicine, including drug and vaccine research in Africa. And so there is a certain degree of skepticism about how good Western medicine might be in all cases. And the fact that traditional medicine culturally is so powerful in most African countries. They're trying to regulate it right now, but they're actually having a lot of challenge doing so because it goes into the definition of healing. Are you a doctor? Are you a healer? Healing in that context is a cultural phenomena. It's not merely a medical specialty. Regulating that is not so easy. And so it brings up some very fascinating challenges.
That is very cool. Firstly, I was just going to say that actually one of my business mentors is married to the guy who created Moodle. So if you want me to see if I can get you in touch, we'll hook you up there. And then the other thing is that I just recently had Samina Khan on the podcast, who is the Gambia project. I always get Gambia and Ghana mixed up. But her, along with Marcus Fernandez at CHE, have introduced homeopathy in Gambia, and they actually worked with the president there as well. So,
I heard.
So it would be good to connect all these people and create like a platform where, it's like power in numbers, right? The more of us that network together and share our resources and our contacts and things, and we can make this happen. That's why I love this podcast and I love connecting people. It's one of my favorite things in the world to do because there's definitely power in numbers.
There certainly is. And I think more than ever, our community is huge. It's much bigger than we think. It's absolutely huge. Ironically, I live in southern Spain some of the year in Seville in October. There is the Liga conference actually happening there.
Yes, I heard.
And normally that's just been for medical doctors. But again, in these years, we all need to be together in this and actually be part of the solution and part of the whole renaissance of the concept of energy healing, if you want, in a larger context than just homeopathy, because it's not just about homeopathy. And I think one of the things I'm trying to explore in my own writing, and one of the things I think we need to look at is many people who embrace the basic paradigm of a holistic energetic consciousness don't understand homeopathy. It is a mystery to most people. And homeopaths have tried very hard to demystify it and communicate the extraordinary alchemy of what homeopathy is, but people don't quite get it. But there's many people asking the same questions, saying the same things. Was just teaching in Wales last weekend at the Welsh School of Homeopathy at the end of the graduation. And a guy called Bill Rumble and Linda Gwilym run the college, and they've been doing it 28 years. And they're stopping in 2 years. And we did these amazing ceremonies and kind of Day of the Dead ceremony up in the woods above the place we were doing it in the middle of Wales. And basically the point being, it's this celebration of spirit, of energy, of alchemy is part of what homeopathy has always been. And we need to actually share that, but communicate it in a rational, scientific way. But it needs to be put out there in a different way. And I think this is where we're at right now.
My husband has often said that homeopathy needs a rebranding because I think it's got so many preconceived ideas. So we actually just need to rebrand our profession. And we're actually about to have a panel discussion with Jan Scholten and Mike Bridger and Deonta Brett and Mark Spinone, Sarah Valentini, Dennis Applewhite and Hilary Dorian and myself, because Mike Bridger was bringing this up that there's lots of homeopaths doing lots of weird stuff in the moment. And we need to get some definitions out there of what is homeopathy and what isn't. It isn't. So I do think we need a rebranding. But more and more people these days are talking about frequency medicine. And I like that it's heading in that direction, that it's heading into this quantum frequency type field, because once people understand that, then homeopathy isn't too far a reach. I think once a lot of people are happy with that concept. And then when you tell them about homeopathy, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And there's a movie, I don't know if you've ever watched Frozen. It's a kid's movie. It's like my favorite movie of all time. But Frozen 2, they've actually got this character, Olaf. And he literally talks about how water has a memory. And I love that there's this generation of little kiddies growing up with knowing the fact that water has a memory. And so I think we're heading in the right direction. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, language is important and the way we communicate it is important. But there's one thing I wanted to mention back to the Africa thing as well, is that my experience working in the field in an African context and looking at how we can communicate and teach that to African doctors, African health professionals, or generally to the public.
And spiritual leaders as well. I know Rebecca Syrup has said in Africa, and the other lady, Alvia Berry, they would go to the bishops and like the church leaders and actually teach them homeopathy as well.
That is the central way you communicate into society in most of Africa, whether it's Christian or Islamic. That's a central social structure. I was with Harry Van der Zee in Kenya, and we were going to all these church groups, and there were HIV/AIDS support groups all over different parts of Kenya. And that is the way in. In terms of teaching homeopathy, though, I just want to show you a picture of my new book, which is called a Therapeutic Guide and Thematic Materia Medica of Homeopathy.
Can you lift it up a little bit more? And then just those watching on the YouTube channel, it's beautiful. Oh, I love, is that the baobab tree on the front?
Yeah, it's a baobab tree.
Oh, beautiful. I love it. Gorgeous.
Yeah. So this book turned into a bit of a monster. It's 600
Oh, look at it. Turned it on the side. Holy moly.
Yeah, I know. So the idea was actually, this was a manual for my students in Kenya. Because if we were doing mobile clinics and out there in the field, and you didn't know whether you had 20 or 100 people in a day, you had to have a system of how you applied homeopathy. And in the end, my experience there is that as homeopathy has evolved and expanded, and new remedies, and new ways of thinking, and new systems, which is all good, the challenge has been that it dilutes the fundamentals. It dilutes the fundamental structure of the methodology of homeopathy. And that fundamental structure has to be the foundation of teaching and the foundation of practice, in my opinion. I've seen so many people being inspired by various homeopaths, developing various systems before the integration has really happened. That basic level of knowledge is there. So when writing this book, I thought, the subtitle of the book was One Book for Under a Tree. So you turn up under a mango or an acacia or a baobab tree in a village in the middle of nowhere, and you've got 65, 70 people there. What are you going to do? Can you do good work? And in which way can you do good work? So I've tried to create this book as a manual to systematize the practice of homeopathy, covering the fundamentals both in methodology and in practice, and in understanding how to access Materia Medica. That's why I call it thematic Materia Medica, because I went through the whole of Fata, Boja, and Boriki again, extracting the salient points and creating themes in generalities and themes in the mental so that it becomes accessible, because people otherwise won't look at that information. It's too dense. It's too convoluted. It has to be made accessible. And so that was the purpose of the thematic Materia Medica. And then the therapeutics was like, you get someone coming in with convulsions, which we do a lot. You just go to the convulsions page in therapeutics. It might seem a shortcut, but a good therapeutic manual has been also a foundational text for 150 years. And this needed reviving. It needed to be brought into a more modern context. So this was the idea of that book. And then the final part was that I looked at Kent's repertory, and I'd read an essay by Elizabeth Wright Hubbard, and she was criticizing some aspects of Kent's repertory and the structure of it. And I already had in mind similar ideas where I refined the generalities, took out huge rubrics that just didn't fit. And it's analog repertorization again. Your computer's batteries died. You're under a tree in the bush somewhere. You need a book that works. And having observed hundreds and hundreds of homeopathic students and practitioners in Africa, I saw the need for a repertory that was accessible and simple. So I put the generalities in mind of Kent's repertory, took out the extraneous stuff, put in some other things of menses and food desires into that to create a broader generality, and then added Boger's aggravations and ameliorations. And as we say in England, Bob's your uncle. You've got a mini repertory that can be in the back of the book that you access while you're in clinical practice in that day. You don't have a liberty to say, come back in 3 days. People say, why? You don't know what you're doing? In Africa, you either know what you're doing or you don't. So telling people to come back doesn't really work in most cases. You need to be able to work in the now, in the here and now, as we say. Yeah.
First question, where do we get a copy?
Either on Amazon, it's available everywhere, or just through my homeopathy site, richardpitthomeopathy.com.
Have you got a preference for one or the other? I always ask authors because so many of them have said that they get such a raw deal when they go through certain publishers. So I always want to make sure that we support the author in the best way possible. So what's your preference?
My site.
Okay.
You buy it online. I get notification. I send it out. It's a print on demand thing, but I've got it set up so that is the best way to go.
Brilliant. I really like a good therapeutic book myself because I figure homeopathy is hard enough as it is. And sometimes you just have a little bit of a brain fag. You've repertorized, things are just not adding up, and you just need a good therapeutic guide. So I do have Morrison's therapeutic book that I really enjoy, especially for things like asthma and whatever. He just has got lots of great info in there, but you can never have enough therapeutic guides. I do think they have their place in homeopathy. And yeah, it's a tricky job that we've got with, they say, in excess of 8,000 different remedies and so many different prescribing methods. And I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of different rubrics. And I do like a good therapeutic guide myself. And I love that you've condensed all of that for us because sometimes it can be a little bit tricky reading the older texts. And especially Kent, I have a love-hate relationship with him because of how he refers to women in a lot of ways, like hysterical woman, this and that. And I remember reading, I think it was Nux Moscata, it was something like hysterical women who haven't learned their lesson about obeying orders or something along those lines. And I just like, it just grinds me up the wrong way. And I know I shouldn't. It was the language of the time, but I really enjoy a good updated manual. And that's why I love Murphy as well. Anything that's been updated in a language that we can understand and use today. So thank you for all your hard work. I'm sure that was years and years in the writing.
Yeah, most of that book was about on and off for 4 or 5 years. My other book, which is The Love, which I've really appreciated writing and very positive feedback about it. It's called The Comparative Materia Medica.
Oh, you like your big books. Hey, that's another big one as well.
580 pages.
Wow.
I know,
you do it properly.
Yeah, the idea of this book is that there are 36 chapters. Each chapter is a major polycrest remedy. Apart from chapter 36, which I call Zingiber, which is ginger. And I leave that for all the remedies that don't fit into the other structure. And each chapter is used as a comparative device to compare large remedies with small remedies. The subtitle is Integrating New and Old Remedies. So again, my personal kind of position is that I'm always like looking to try and it's like a Mag Muir kind of thing. I want to look at both sides of every argument. I want this to be the philosophical peacemaker. I haven't adopted any major philosophical line or following any particular sort of guru homeopathy worship. You try to take from everything and integrate it into the paradigm that we all accept. So this book was looking at the new remedies and the challenges of using new remedies within the context of knowing the fundamentally proven and well-used remedies. So this book was an exploration of that. So I go into a lot of new remedies, whether it's bird remedies, insect remedies, but you've got the apis chapter. So then I go into all the insects. You got the sepia chapter. I go to all the sea remedies. Tuberculinum takes me into all the bird remedies and then some of the air remedies. This map on the front is like a constellation. So the idea is you're looking at a constellation of stars and planets that all seem random. But as we know, they're not random. They have patterns. They have relationships. And so this is about the idea of looking at a constellation of stars as a constellation of remedies in our Materia Medica and the patterns that exist within that constellation and how to navigate the patterns. So this requires the kind of in-depth study of Materia Medica to challenge your knowledge of Materia Medica from every level, whether you're looking at therapeutically, constitutionally, miasmatically, psychologically, etc., etc., etc. And so, so this was published in 2015 and it continues to sell really well. And it's great for graduates, students, and practitioners. It's a comparative device again, like a therapeutic device, but in this way, you're comparing from the context of the whole remedy, not a condition. But it's allowing ideally smaller remedies to seep up to the surface that otherwise wouldn't do so for most people. And so that was, the first sort of big tome that I wrote. The other aspect I'll just mention before I go to the other books was what I tried to do is to say, like, a remedy represents a strategy of life. When we move into the sphere of energy of a remedy, it reflects our own individual strategy at that time. That is reflected in a remedy picture as we are compensating for something, as we are reacting to. So seeing the pattern in the remedy and seeing the pattern in the human being is what we do, however we get there. So I talk about a remedy having a trajectory, a progression from perfect health to perfect death. And within that line, there is a level of pathological and other kinds of expression, cultural expression, however you see it, that reflects itself in a remedy. But it's within a line, a continuum from the healthy stage to the dishealthy stage, unhealthy stage. I give it 3 stages, what I call 3 developmental stages: intrinsic, compensated, and decompensated. This is not original thinking. Many homeopaths have said similar things, but I relate it to the 3 main miasms of sauropsychosis and syphilis. The intrinsic stage is the sauric stage. It's the basic stage. It's the constitutional stage. It's the body type stage. It's the stage of the person's personality, as they say, which is the part that does not change. We use it to indicate a remedy, but it doesn't fundamentally change. It's our nature. But out of our nature comes compensation, a reaction. And that's often what we prescribe on, and that is often what brings people to us. This is a reactive stage, a stage of exaggeration. That relates to the psychotic miasm, and therefore we can see it within the context again of those miasms. The decompensated stage is the broken down stage of a remedy, the destructive stage, the pathological stage, the end point of any remedy. And that relates to the syphilitic miasm, which is the destructive component. And all remedies will have component parts of each of those 3 stages. A remedy like Calcarea belongs more in the intrinsic and compensated stage and a bit less in the decompensated stage, whereas Mercurius and Aurum have more manifestation in the decompensated stage because of the syphilitic influence. So by looking at materia that way, one can see a progression within remedies and see that a person at any one time is on that line and only revealing, say, 10% of that remedy picture. A homeopath needs to identify that 10%. And don't worry if the other 90% isn't in there. Just because you can't say, oh, well, I didn't give nux vomica because the person didn't desire alcohol. Not every nux vomica will desire alcohol. So you've got to deal with what is there, not what is not there. And the other thing to be really wary of is that very loose, casual absolutisms of character descriptions in remedies is also a mistake. saying Graphites is always an artist type, or Nux Vomica or always businessman, try to fit them into what I call a false archetype. This is not correct. It doesn't. We're dealing with the phenomenon of symptoms, which can fit into anybody. So we have to be really careful and fluid in our way of analyzing remedies and what we identify with them.
Oh, it's hard not to fall for those archetypes, though, because it makes it so easy to remember a remedy. And I remember the first time I prescribed arsenicum for a young mum, and I had this idea of like this man in my head that's so fastidious and all that, and did my repetrization. I was just a new homeopath, and I was just so confused that arsenicum came up. And I remember saying to her, look, I'm going to give you this remedy, but it's just not, I just don't understand why this remedy's come up, because it's just not how the picture of what I thought arsenicum was. You just don't fit that, but the physical symptoms, everything you fit. So I gave that to her, and it was the most amazing gift. Our clients are our biggest teachers. And, you know, 2 months later, she said to me, Eugenie, I don't identify as an anxious person anymore. I never thought I would say this. I have been anxious my entire life. And since you've given me that remedy, if I think of anxiety or an anxious person, I just don't identify with that anymore. And I was like, okay, so clearly this picture, this archetype that I had in my mind of arsenicum is not always going to look like that. But it does make it easy to remember a remedy if you think of the business-driven business person that works on, plays hard, and you can Nux Vomica. So it makes it easier for you to see, but we have to remember not to fall in that trap, because you can miss a remedy if you do.
Yeah.
I really like this timeline that you're talking about, and the psoriasis, syphilis, and psychosis. That's really cool. You're making me intrigued to check out the book now. It sounds amazing. And you've written another book.
I've written 2 other ones I've written, which was my first one, which is called The Natural Medicine Guide for Travel and Home. Having traveled the world for, forever, I just thought, there needs to be a really good travel guide. There had been other ones in homeopathy, but they were a bit outdated, and also they were rather big. There had to be a book that you could travel with, and that also dealt with tropical diseases, for example, and dealt with issues of prevention, that dealt with issues of vaccination, that had to look at what you need to do if you're going into the bush in the DRC. What level of risk are you actually exposed to in that situation, as opposed to what level of risk you're exposed to in a fancy hotel in Phuket, Thailand? They're both in Asia, but the risks are profoundly different. Therefore, what you need to look at is different. And if you haven't had that experience then, and you're traveling and you want to have that knowledge, there is a need to know at what risk you are putting yourself into by going wherever you're going. Obviously, Africa and India are probably these 2 most challenging places to travel to for your physical and your mental health. I've had malaria. I had typhoid. Typhoid was a ridiculous thing. It was stupid. Malaria I couldn't really avoid. I was doing malaria prophylaxis a lot in Ghana, which I think really worked. And then for some reason, it didn't work in Malawi. So even as a homeopath, we need to be humble about our experiences. And maybe I got a bit casual, which inevitably, when you live a long time taking your malaria nosode prophylaxis or whatever prophylactic treatment you're taking, is you tend to forget. And so this book goes into all of that. What to use for prophylaxis? What are the alternatives to vaccines? What are the risks of different vaccines? Analyzing each one. And then I go into all the different major tropical diseases like malaria, typhoid, dengue, Chagas disease, schistosomiasis, African trypanosomiasis, and even the plague, all of them, and look at what are the homeopathic potentialities for that, what are the risks of it, what are the symptoms of it, and how you need to be aware and prepare for that kind of travel. So this was that book. Now, this became a bit big. It's got 100 remedies in the back, like a synopsis of the main remedy. So it's a very good therapeutic tool. And I actually pushing my own kind of like thing is that I think it's a great book for first and second year students, because it's a very good therapeutic manual again. Even though it's designed as a travel manual, it's therapeutics. At the same time, it goes into a lot of detail of many unusual diseases. And there's a whole chapter on Lyme disease, for example.
Wow.
Which is a huge area, especially in North America now. And so being aware of diagnosis and treatment of Lyme and how to look at it is really important. So I have a whole chapter on that in the book, etc., etc. Yeah, so that was written, and Harry Van der Zee writes the foreword for this book. And yeah, that came out in 2014 initially.
Well, you sound perfectly qualified to have written that book, because one thing that I have a gripe with is people trying to teach things or write about things that they don't actually, that they haven't experienced. And that's why I have a lot of issues also with homeopaths who only teach and don't do consults. I see that even though, funny enough, before we started recording, I said to Richard, this episode's being released on the 22nd of July. And he's, Eugenie, that's my birthday. I'll be 66. So even though you're at the young spring chicken age of 66 almost, that you are still practicing, because I see you still seeing clients. So I love that you've traveled so extensively and that you've written this book. And I love that you're lecturing and still seeing clients as well, because I do think it's so important to always keep your hand in the pie. Is that the right expression?
Yeah.
Keep your finger on the pulse. Maybe that's maybe not that. Keep your finger on the
in the
pulse.
pie, finger in the pulse. Yeah, both. I think it's finger. Yeah.
Keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. So instead of just being a theoretical homeopath and theoretically teaching and writing on things, that you're actually in the trenches doing the work and then going and teaching and writing about that. So that is an excellent book. The travel one. What I would say is somehow we need to convert that into an app, because so many people have their phones when they travel these days. So even though that book is a great size, you had it in your hand. It's actually a great travel size.
No, this is the travel size one. This is the look. Now, I wrote a smaller one.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So that's the back pocket manual.
Was that an A5? It looks like about an A5 size. Hey, yeah, great.
And that reduces. I took out some of the more esoteric tropical diseases that you're not likely to come across. And I took out some of the remedies and just condensed it. I took out the vaccine part and left that on the web page so people can then read that beforehand, where they can look at different healthcare choices they make. And this is the back pocket manual. My subtitle is Mao's Red Book for the Apocalypse.
You've got such a good sense of humor.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was writing, I thought we go to hell in a handbasket, which it looks like we're doing on the planet right now. And you have to be more self-reliant. And, that means many different things to different people. Part of that is taking care of your healthcare and having a homeopathy kit and your health book for friends and family. So it came out of that idea. And the fact that the bigger book actually, as you say, it's still reasonably sized, but it's still a bit chunky if you're trying to reduce your load to the minimum when you're on the road. So that's why I did that one.
Okay, we need to have a little chat about bulk buys, because that travel book, I'd love to bulk buy that and sell that over here in Australia to my clients. I think that's an essential to have. That's so cool. And you've got one more book, right?
Yeah, there's another book coming. I don't have it here because it's still being printed. And it's actually a book that I co-wrote with my friend Barbara in Swaziland, which is traditional medicines in Swaziland and their homeopathic use for endangered species. So her project, the Swaziland Homeopathy Project, has got grants to not only run homeopathy clinics, but we're doing sustainability projects that certain endangered medicine species in Southern Africa that have been overused by the traditional healers need to be protected and revived. So she's got a whole nursery project going on in Swaziland, South Africa, where we are cultivating medicinal plants. Now, at the same time, we've done 6 provings of 6 plant medicines with traditional healers. The traditional healers are our provers. And we have just written that book, doing all the provings, all the analysis of the provings, and a long introductory essay on the validity of traditional medicine and the validity of homeopathy and the cross-fertilization of our knowledge base. And that book is going to be produced. I'll have it done in the next few weeks. So that's been Barbara's inspiration. And I went down and worked with her. It was very easy for me to do because we were living in Mozambique on the beach overlooking the most extraordinary ocean. And we sat down and we cranked it out. That's the next one that's coming out. So.
Wow. Lots of interesting things happening there. I saw a picture of Jeremy Sher and John Morgan the other day on a boat somewhere in Africa talking about the new organon that he's writing. So it sounds like there's a few homeopathy ideas being birthed there in Africa. That's great.
Yeah. Hey, it all began there. Let's go back. And,
amazing. So we've got the books. Was there another book? Was that's it for book?
The other one I'm going to produce, which I'm working on, is just a compilation of essays on homeopathic theory and practice, which I will put all my provings that I've done. I did provings of tobacco, which is another book.
I was going to ask you about tobacco.
Yeah. So that book I don't have a copy right here actually, but That was my first book in 2006. We did a proving of Nicotina rustica. That is the sister of Nicotina tabacum, which is the tobacco we normally smoke. Nicotina rustica is the indigenous tobacco of the Native Americans in North and South America. It has 4 times more nicotine in. And it also has harmaline compounds. And harmaline compounds are potentially hallucinogenic compounds that are also found in ayahuasca. Most people now know about ayahuasca and its use as a medicine, as use as a healing tool. I've experienced it in Peru and in Brazil and in North America. And I read a book called The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby, where he talks about the use of ayahuasca and its connection to the DNA level of reality, and how by taking ayahuasca, you go back into your original DNA, not only your own family, but in a sense, the DNA of the planet. And that's how elements like ayahuasca can give you a kind of spiritual experience, because in a way it's functioning on that level of DNA. So one of the chapters in the book, I call it Ayahuasca, Tobacco and DNA, the Mother, the Son and the Holy Ghost. And it's looking at the role between ayahuasca and tobacco, and how tobacco is often an ally in the journey of life. The journey of life between life and death, the journey in life between birth and death, night and dark, day and night. Tobacco exists in the transitionary moments of life. When you suck on tobacco, you're sucking in the breath, doing like pranayama. And in that moment, you're stopping time. It's interesting that moments of transition in life, traditionally, that's when we've wanted to smoke. The moment before your child is born, after your child is born, the moment before your execution, the moment you arrive at the top of a mountain. Those are those moments where tobacco is calling you. And so I decided to write a book based on the proving, and to write a proving again that actually explores a wider socio-political, cultural context. So it puts tobacco into a whole context. So I do a whole 50-page introduction of how tobacco came to the West and why human beings had a fascination with tobacco. Why do we need to imbibe a noxious, toxic substance like that? What is it? It must offer us something. So what is it that it offers us? And then I do a cross-fertilization or a cross-study of how the Native Americans use tobacco and how the Western person uses tobacco. And in the beginning of the book, there's a quote by Gary Snyder, the famous beat poet. Do you know Gary Snyder? He's in the 1950s, 1960s with Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and Neil Cassidy and all these cool dudes hanging out in Oregon and California and elsewhere. And he's a famous poet. And he says those cultures that demonize death are therefore more likely to be harmed by the substances that cause that. So in a way, this is a paraphrase of the quote, but what he's saying is that those cultures who can't face death are more likely to be harmed by certain substances. So in a way, it's a susceptibility. What we've done with tobacco and how much cancer it's caused is a reflection also of our nature, of our culture, not merely tobacco. It's how we've used it and commercialized it. So I look at the cross-cultural influences and how different cultures adopted tobacco, and how the native people use tobacco as a way of a conduit to communicate to spirits. Because for them, for spirits, tobacco is food. It's a form of food. They don't have a body, they have a spirit. But if you want to connect to them, then bring out the smoke. And that was actually still one of my favorite books, because I wanted to show the profundity of homeopathic provings as a sort of form of a shamanic journey into the nature of life, and how unique that is, that we combine what could be said to be a traditional shamanic or alchemical journey with the scientific methodology that Hahnemann put in place to explore the medicinal potentiality of medicines. So yeah, that was another thing. And that's why I still love doing provings, and I'm still drawn to do more provings. And they are mystical experiences, because you set the intention, and then it sparks off a series of ripples into the universe, that the proving begins the moment you intend it, actually. And we had phenomenal experience with the tobacco proving, because we had an earthquake in San Francisco 2 hours before the proving, and we got everyone together to actually meditate for an hour, taking the remedy under the tongue and not talking. And then people wrote down their observations. And of course, people were writing down their experience of having been part of an earthquake. So the question was, is this merely coincidence or some kind of serendipity? And I make the case in the book that it reflected a serendipity. And it came out in the proving, it came out in clinical cases, and it came out in American folklore. in which a woman called Golden Flowers falls into a ravine, a chasm, holding tobacco in her hand. So the metaphor plays out in many ways. And I think provings are a way of revealing the inner nature of reality, if you want. And I think it's great to communicate that, to share that kind of experience.
Yeah, I had Eileen Noman on the show earlier in the year. We did a series of 8 episodes, and she talked about how tobacco is offered. Like when she talks to the plant spirits, she'll offer tobacco before she talks to them. I don't know if they do the same in Africa when they're talking to spirits, whether they offer tobacco or if they offer something else. But it's very timely you talking about the provings, because we did a trituration of the cassowary 2 weeks ago. And I don't know if the cassowary and the emu are the only 2 feathers in the world that has a split spine. So where it inserts in the bird, it actually splits into 2 feathers. And I interviewed Paul Terrio and I said, I really want to do emu because I was given some emu feathers and I actually was so fascinated by them. And then he said, no, we've already done emu. You should do cassowary. So we triturated that 2 weeks ago. And as Sarah Valentini was taking the chair down, because we did 2 triturations on opposite ends of Australia. There was a group of us here in Perth and a group in Melbourne triturating at the same time, which was also cool because of the split feather that we were doing it at the same time. Yeah. Intentional or not. But she was carrying these chairs down for the provers and she broke her foot. And one of our triturators on the way home from the trituration was in a car accident. And myself and my colleague the next day was almost in a car accident. And so sometimes you got to be a little bit careful, like you don't really know what you're in for. But then there are about 50 cassowaries that are killed in car accidents every year over east in Australia. So it is very interesting. And you got to wonder, is it a coincidence? Is it serendipitous? Or is it actually part of the proving? And that's the part where I do feel the more provings and the more triturations you do, the easier it is to define is it or is it not? Because I've just had a tiny little cold sore pop up here on my lip 2 weeks after the proving. But I have a history of that as of 4 years ago when we had somebody I've never had in my life. Nobody in my family has it. Nobody in my husband's family has it. But 3 years ago, somebody stayed over at our house who had the COVID vaccine the day before. And the next morning of them staying at our house, I woke up with my first ever cold sore in my life, and I've had them recurring since. And so I had this one pop up. I hadn't had one for maybe 6 or 8 months or so. Tiny one. So I am sitting in my head, is this something about the proving that's come up, or is it's presenting different to how it normally would? It's normally much larger. It's just a tiny one that's popped up and it's healed really quickly. And so I'm like, is that part of the proving or is it not? And so this is the part of myself that I'm still trying to get a bit more in touch with my intuition when I'm doing provings and triturations, that I can differentiate whether something is part of that or not. Especially with triturations, it's common for the provers to say, oh, I've got a sore elbow or a sore wrist or a sore shoulder. And that's from the actual manual action itself. Yeah. And I found myself in the first few triturations being really fascinated by the creaminess of the lactose in the bowl and things like that. And then after a few, you realize, oh no, that's just part of kind of the process. So you know what's part of the process and actually what's part of the remedy. But that's really something that just comes with time. And you're right. The moment you're aware of the substance or that you are going to do one, you might not even know what the substance is. You do start experiencing some things as well. Yeah.
And I think, as Hanuman said, it's good that everyone experiences that and does a proving. They don't have to organize it, but they should participate in one. I think that's really an amazing thing to do. And we did a proving of bristlecone pine, a trituration proving. And that's one of the oldest living things on the planet. It grows up north of Bishop in the Sierra Nevada in California. And it's 10,000 years old or something. It's fascinating, the energy that comes off that anyway. And I think, all of this is just extraordinary. And we did one in Malawi where we did a proving of cassava. And cassava is obviously the staple food for a lot of Africa now. Ironically, cassava and potato and corn actually originate from the Americas, but that now they are ubiquitous in all of Africa. And when we did the proving, we didn't have a nice mortar and pestle. We had to use the big mortar and pestle that they pound the cassava in. And I used corn as the sack lat. And we were just pounding for hours and everything was just going everywhere and everyone's dancing around the stage singing. And so it was a very African proving, but it worked. We produced the substance and it's an interesting remedy. And cassava, one species, has cyanide in it. So it actually has a lot of fascinating digestive and neurological symptoms. And so we prove it up to a 6C. So it was at that subclinical kind of dose. It was virtually still materials. So yeah, I love all of that. And
Do you find that the people around you get affected as well? Because at the C4 trituration, I had a really sharp stabbing pain in my right ear several times during the trituration. It's interesting. I was actually timekeeping on that one. I wasn't even triturating, but I was obviously still experiencing symptoms. And that night, my husband said, "Oh, I've got this sharp pain in my right ear." The next day, my daughter said, "I have this sharp pain in my right ear." And the next day, my son said that. And nothing came of any of it for any of us, but it was just this sharp stabbing pain in the right ear. And I was like, just seeing like every member of my family saying this. And I'm like, what's going on? It was quite interesting. So I think there's some unwilling participants in this as well.
Yeah, it's the field effect. It's the morphogenetic field of whatever you're doing, the phenomenon. And if you're vulnerable and you're within the purview of that energy, it makes sense. But that has to be a good clinical symptom of that proving.
It has to be, With because as we were triturating the cassowary, it became quite apparent to me that it's very left brain. Is that the one where it's more methodical, where grinding for 7 minutes, scraping for 3 minutes, grinding for 7 minutes, scraping for 3 minutes. And I was just wondering about if we had more like a free flow way of triturating where we give somebody an hour for C1 and they grind and triturate more intuitively. And so when you've just said about this thing that you were like doing it African styles, I'm guessing that was not like 7 minutes of grinding, 3 minutes of scraping. It was probably a bit more free flow.
It was, we actually just kept the trituration going all the way through to, I think obviously to 6C. We actually did it to 6C and then dissolved it that way. There has to be flexibility in this in that way, for sure. I like it that we're very methodical. And by the way, actually, I'm going to see John Morgan today. He's coming by on the way to Wales. So
can you give him a big cuddle from me? He was on the podcast a while ago and he donated really generously to the podcast ages ago. And he's such a generous person anyway. So it's such a beautiful energy about him. So please tell him hi from me.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. We've been mates since 1985 and we were performing together at the Homeopathy conference in the UK. We were doing the entertainment. He was playing the piano and I was a juggler and street theatre performer at that point. And I always say that I'm known in Britain, not really for my homeopathy, but for juggling carving knives, leaning over old ladies in the front row of the Homeopathy conference. And
that's good to know, because I've been looking for a pianist, because I have said for the last 3 or so years that we need to, there's actually so many homeopaths who are musicians as well. Frederick Schoyens and Luke Norland and Dion Tabret and Marcus Fernandez vocals and guitar as well. So now that I know that John does piano, I've got a pianist as well. And Luke does the French horn and some other bits and pieces as well, and guitar, I think. So we've got our guitarists, we've got the pianist now. So we really need to get these homeopaths together to create a song which they can then release, and then they can use it for fundraising for a project in Africa or something like that. But we need to make this happen.
You do. And don't forget the didge player, amateur didge player.
Okay.
I don't get the circular breathing quite right all the time.
So I don't know if there's place for a tongue drum, but I can bring my...
Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
I can bring my tongue drums. Brilliant. Oh, that'll be fun. Amazing. Now, tell us a little bit about you've talked us a little bit about your future plans already, but what else can you tell us? I just so love listening to your stories, and I'm just scared that we might miss anything out today. So what else can you tell us about things that you've got going, how you see the future of homeopathy, any future plans you have, any exciting things on the horizon?
My personal thing now is I've given myself another 4 years to complete the work I want to do. And part of what I want to add to either one book or another book is to look at, again, come back to the idea of archetypes and do a study comparing the Enneagram with some homeopathic archetypes and also with some other kind of archetypal way of thinking. So we can bring into it more, again, building the bridges, if you want, looking at how we think homeopathically is just part of a more collective, symbolic way of thinking. And there's a book called by Leon Vanier, a French homeopath, on homeopathy. And he goes into the different archetypes of the Jupiterian, the Saturnian, the lunar, the archetype. And he said at the end of the book, this is just a kind of a beginning of an idea that needs to be explored further. And I think he wrote that in the 1920s, 1930s. So I want to take that a bit further and weave in different ways of thinking. And I've always had a sort of an amateur interest in systems like the Enneagram and also the I Ching, which is phenomenal, but it's that's a whole other thing. But I think there is a way in which I think we need to cross-fertilize again outside of our immediate kind of reality and see it outside of that. And I think looking archetypally can be interesting in that way. And I was also reading a book when I was teaching last weekend about the evolution, using miasms as part of an evolutionary impulse. And that's based partly on a book by Peter Fraser, who was a great English homeopath who did a lot of amazing provings and worked with Misha Norland and the School of Homeopathy. Very good mind. And he talked about the evolution of miasms, including the AIDS miasm, and how the AIDS miasm corresponded with an idea of digitization, of breaking down of boundaries, globalization, which may even relate into how HIV/AIDS spread, which could be coming through contaminated vaccines. There's a lot of evidence that may be contaminated hepatitis B vaccines, whether it is or not, it fitted into a time set. And so now we're moving into the COVID miasm, which we could call an extension of the radioactive miasm. He had the Sora miasm, and then between Sora and psychosis, you have sub-miasms, whether it's smallpox or the plague or leprosy, and then the psychosis to syphilis miasm. And in between, you've got tuberculosis, which is rebelling against the constrictures and the hierarchy of the psychotic miasm. And then syphilitic to AIDS. And in between, you've got the cancer miasm. And then you've got then AIDS to COVID. And in between, you've got the radioactive miasm and the remedies that might fit into that. Now, the radioactive miasm ties into the COVID miasm, in my opinion, because again, we're dealing with genetic mutation. We're dealing with transhumanism. Even transgenderism is all about mutation, adaptation, change. And we're not judging anything here, but we're saying this is the phenomena of what is. So we have to put the COVID, which we know is an mRNA vaccine, which we know now does mutate the DNA and it potentially may create DNA mutation of the whole species, whether you've taken the vaccine or not. Psychologically, it fits into the idea of control and surveillance. And physically, the symptom comes through is suffocation. So you're seeing a theme of and this was the first massive symptoms that we saw of hypoxia and respiratory distress that occurred in the first phase of COVID. And also even what the vaccine could do because of the spike protein and all of that. So suffocation and then the remedies that come up for that. And I should mention that Andre Sain did a lot of research into the remedy carbonium oxygenizatum, carbon monoxide, and how carbon monoxide is maybe a very interesting remedy for some of the COVID conditions because carbon monoxide poisoning, there's huge amounts of information on the toxicity of that, which is fascinating to look at the corollary of how people express symptoms during COVID because it was a deoxygenization process. People were breathing it in, but the oxygen wasn't getting to the tissues. And carbon monoxide, its metabolic action is to prevent the hemoglobin in the blood getting into the oxygen. The oxygen could not go into the blood. That parallels actually how cyanide also deoxygenates the body. And that cyanide functions by stopping the oxygen leaving the blood into the tissues. A different mechanism of action, but a similar expression. So the concept of suffocation is a very important idea of how we are feeling really now as a species. And I think we now need to explore certain remedies along that. So part of what I want to explore, it goes more into my own political interests now, is actually seeing health and politics are not separate. They merely reflect one another. And the idea that Peter laid out, which I want to explore more philosophically and practically, is how any particular major disease expresses itself often in a time and place that is a reflection of both an energetic, cultural, societal dynamic. It's also part of an adaptation to change. And so certain diseases come at certain times that reflect what is going on within us. And part of our work in homeopathy, with our understanding of miasms, is to reveal the unique perspective we bring to that way of thinking. So there's a famous American philosopher called Charles Eisenstein, and he wrote a book called The Ascent of Humanity. And he's looking at what we could call now the current sort of end times scenario, the crisis of humanity at this present time, why that's happening, and the impact of technology onto us and how that forces us to adapt to the situation we're living in. And we have seen that in the last 20 years with digitization, AI, your phone, which now dictates to you what you do, where you go, and everything else. And the impact that has on us, both individually and also spiritually and collectively, and looking at that from a homeopathic point of view. And I think we have a unique philosophical and practical angle on all of that. And so my interest is to also explore more that philosophical and political angle that we're living in. I have a political blog as well, which is the first one I wrote was covidwatching.org that I did with my colleague Carol Boyce in the UK. And that's still up there. And that analyzed and deconstructed the first year and a half of COVID. And then I've moved to a Substack column, and it's richardwilliampitt.substack. Some of it's health. There's a huge amount of research there on COVID and on the vaccine and the health aspect of that. Some of it's my work. Some of it comes from colleagues of mine who collate a lot of the medical research that's been going on and the evidence about what's been happening. And I try to keep within a framework of realism and back it up with scientific studies. I'm not a scientist, so some of it I don't even understand. But I try to piece it together and put together different writers that write about what we're dealing with. And I veer into different areas of more political analysis, which may or may not be of interest to people, because I talk about the demise of the European Union, or I talk about Palestine, or I talk about whatever takes my fancy. But that's a more of a personal endeavor right now. But my homeopathy writings is more about, as we move forward, how we can interpret that within a homeopathic context.
I don't think in 300 episodes we have ever had an episode with this much jam-packed information. Like, you certainly don't mince any words. Like, there's just this. I cannot actually wait to go listen back on this episode, because you have managed to squeeze so much information into this, Richard. Thank you so much. And you're right, homeopaths are pretty interesting in how, because we're always looking for patterns. We're always trying to look for patterns. What is the frequency of what is going on here?
That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's so brilliant listening to how your mind's working and wanting to piece together the pattern of COVID and everything else. So that's really nice. I like that. And I just want to say, I have all of Peter Fraser's books. He just has a way of so concisely putting information. He just gets to the heart of something without messing around. So I have his birds book and the spiders and the snakes and the miasms and the drug pictures, and they're all just sitting there pride of place on my cupboard. And there's not a day that goes past that I don't pull one of them off the shelf. He's just managed to really condense the essence of each remedy. And so I love that.
He did great work. I used in this book here, he was one of the major references I used throughout the book, along with Vermeulen's work. They were the kind of staple sort of sources I would use to back up what I was writing about. Yeah. And I knew Peter personally as a friend as well.
I really had hoped I could have had him on the podcast. I think he must have passed away about 2 years ago or so now.
Yeah.
Something like that. So. Yeah. There's a few of them, Peter Chappell and him and Robin Murphy, a few of them that I was hoping to get on the podcast, and we've just lost a few greats the last few years. But on the podcast, we've talked about it a few times, but I think it was their time to go to the spirit world to help. I think they're still working just as hard, if not harder, in the spirit world, mentoring all of us from the spiritual realm. So I know that they're with us every single day in their books and their writings and everything else.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Richard, any final messages that you want to leave us with? I've got your websites here. There's richardpitthomeopathy.com, thenaturalmedicineguy.com, talesfromtheroad.info. That looked really interesting. I saw a picture of you with your motorbike on there.
Yeah, that's my motorbike stories.
Yeah, richardwilliampitt.substack.com, and we'll put it all in the show notes as well. But if you want to summarize today for us, or if you want to leave a message for us, or any final words of wisdom that you want to leave us with before we wrap up.
I just want to acknowledge the people that I've worked with, that I continue to work with, and the work that's going on. For whatever reason, for me, I always said when I finished my job in Kenya, which really took nearly everything I had, 5 intense years, I thought, okay, I'll take a break, but then I'll come back for one more bout in the ring, one more project, and I'm looking to see what that is. But right now, that's really about Africa. So I just want just to put Africa on the map. And when I teach, I just start with a map of Africa. I love geography and I love politics and I love history and I love African history. So I just want to put Africa on the map because I feel like it is such a place and there's so much potential there and there's so much heart there. And I want to see how homeopathy will evolve. And I want to acknowledge my friends in the Ghana Homeopathy Project. We have a great website also. Just go to the GhanaHomeopathyProject.com or .org. And then I'm working now in Kenya with the Kenyan Society of Homeopaths and then with Barbara in Swaziland. And she's working with colleagues in South Africa and Mozambique. And I just want to say that there's a lot of need out there. There's a lot of work going on. And finally, just my love has always been India spiritually. I always feel like that's where I was formed as a person. I became an adult in India, and all the Indian colleagues and homeopaths and who keep homeopathy alive today. This is the heart, really, in many ways. And so many people that I've worked and appreciated, whether it's Fruit Masters or Sankran and my old Kolkata colleagues, S.P. Day and Kalyan Bhattacharya, amazing people. And I've sat in with amazing people there all over India and just appreciate the extraordinary work that's done there in homeopathy. Really, it's just an appreciation of that. And then, so really that's it. And then, all my mates in England that I haven't lived in England formally much for 38 years, but I'm still very connected here. And having left America 15 years ago, I'm reconnecting to my own roots in Britain and the homeopathic community here as well. So,
That's amazing. There certainly is an incredible homeopathic community in the UK. I look forward to hopefully heading over there one day and meeting some of them in person, although I'll get to meet a few of them in person in Bali in September, which I'm really much looking forward to. So that will be very fun.
How nice is that? Good place to go.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably been there as well on all your travels.
Yeah, I've been to Bali. Yeah.
Richard, thank you so much for today. We're going to have to get you back for round 2 because there's loads more that I would love for us to have a chat about. But I really appreciate your time today. And thank you for everything that you've done. And I'm excited to get all of your books and delve into them because they sound like they are really great, actionable books that we can use straight away.
Great, Eugenia. A pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been great. It's always good to share your stuff. It doesn't matter who you are. You want to share your work. You want to communicate and get it out there. And I've lived down under in Australia and New Zealand, so it's really good to connect and all the good stuff.
Awesome. See you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Thanks so much. Bye.